Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Eric Krause. I am the manager of online services and also the product owner of the NetSUS Appliance. So just a few minutes here, I want to spend a little bit of time on the background of this. It's about 2 years ago, we started using this internally as they were starting to phase out the Xserve, and then shortly after we put it out on GitHub. One of the neat things we saw was we posted the discussion out on Jamf Nation, and immediately it was one of the most popular discussions we had. Since then, we've had over 13 people check out the code and kind of do their own thing with it. We've got 51 people following it, and we've done 4 versions. 2 months ago, we released 2.0. Just to show of hands, how many people have taken a look at that? Fantastic. What it comes down to is all this stuff. Everything about this product has been about the community, from the OS to the reposado piece, to you guys contributing back to it. Every revision we've done has had some aspect of the community involved with it. So I just want to encourage people to keep contributing, go out to GitHub, take a look at what's out there. Later on during this presentation, we'll talk about our next revision that we'll be doing later this week, and that all came from community members too. So check it out, keep contributing. It's been great. So, and with that, I'd like to introduce Jason, who's going to share his story about how he uses it in their environment.
Good afternoon, guys. Quick question, how many of you already use the NetSUS Appliance? Good amount, awesome. So hopefully you guys can learn something. Like Eric said, my name is Jason Borkhardt. I'm the Apple Platform Team Lead at a major insurance company. I work for a contractor, so they do not let me say specifically who I work for, so just it's in the top 3. Let's not say exactly who, I guess. This is taking advantage of the NetSUS Appliance presentation agenda. What is the NetSUS Appliance? What is Netboot? And we'll talk about software updates and some use cases that we use it for. First, I'll tell you guys a little bit about myself. My name is Jason Borkhardt. Obviously, I've been in the industry for probably about only 5 years. I'm only 24 years old, so I guess that's not that bad. I started out working at Country Financial, doing some mobile device management work. Then I went back to the university and got Apple certified, got my AMCT, started working on laptops, repairing those. A recruiter contacted me from this consulting company, said, hey, do you want to work at this other company? I said, sure. And I've been in my current role for a little bit over a year now. Enough about me, though. Let's talk about the NetSUS Appliance. Get up there. Maybe? Yes, so what is NetSUS? The NetSUS Appliance is a Netboot or software update server that is a free alternative to Apple servers that will allow you to perform management of any Netboot images or any software updates using multiple branches, multiple Netboot images. It really helps you get a complete control of your environment, imaging, software updates, all through open source tool and without the need for any additional hardware since it can all be virtualized. So how can I install NetSUS? Well, currently, the installers are available on Ubuntu 10.04 and 12.04. Client and server, and a virtual appliance is also available. So currently, we use a virtual appliance because we didn't want to deploy any existing hardware and we didn't have any virtual machines spun up yet or the ability to put anything on any virtual machines. So you can use something like VirtualBox or any other free or paid virtual software to put this OVA file in. Make sure you get a good enough hard drive size since it's going to need to download all these software updates and potentially host your Netboot images. So let's talk about Netboot first. How many people use the NetSUS Appliance specifically for Netboot? Not that many. Okay. Netboot is a technology that enables Apple devices with capable firmware to do a diskless booting where it does not boot from anything that's locally on the machine. It'll boot over the Ethernet cable, and you can have that image stored on a server somewhere that's in a data center somewhere else, same subnet. Very, very powerful stuff. So you can have people across the world, as long as they're connected to your network, booting off of an image that you have hosted somewhere else. Why would you want to do this? Well, we use it for troubleshooting. We also use it for imaging. A really, really popular option or choice for Netboot is to do imaging with it, since you can create your own image using the Casper imaging tool and have people Netboot over the internet and image the machine really, really easily. You don't have to just host one image either. A lot of people I know I've saw in Jamf Nation were really, really curious about how can I host multiple netboot images. If you look at the user interface on the NetSUS appliance, you have a drop-down and you can only select one at a time. That's the default. Well, just because an image is the default image does not mean that you cannot serve multiple images at the exact same time. So the NetSUS appliance, all it's really doing is running a TFTP server hosting these files. So as long as you use the correct bless statement, regardless of what the user interface on the web interface is showing, you can specify any file that you want to that's being hosted by that TFTP server, and it'll netboot very, very easily. So that feature that people have been asking for really is already implemented. The only thing that drop-down menu will do as far as that default booter file is saying, hey, if I am on the same subnet or if I have DHCP helpers enabled and I press N, what is this appliance going to give me by default? You can still specify all the other images. They're still being served, as I just said. So what are the requirements of netboot? Well, there's a couple different kind of netboot images that you can create. You can do a simple boot image, which is going to be an EFI booter only. So if anybody uses Apple Service Toolkit, how many people use Apple Service Toolkit with GSX? All right, awesome. All that is a simple EFI booter. It's a really, really small image that doesn't have anything extra. It's all self-contained inside of that EFI image. You can have more complex images as well. So if you actually have a true traditional netboot image or a net install, then that's going to have a kernel cache as well as a DMG of the file system. So what are those? A kernel cache is really what it sounds like. It's a cache of the kernel. It has the kernel that it needs to boot from as well as all the extensions and cache, some of the caches that the system needs to boot. And then it'll tell the firmware, okay, here's the kernel, here's all the things that I need to know how to boot from the DMG. Give me a DMG of the file system, and that's where you're going to have that massive, 3 to 4 gigabyte DMG that'll host the applications, it'll host the library, all these other things, and that's when you can put in Casper imaging and all that other kind of stuff. It's all built into that DMG. So what do we got next? So let's look at a bless command. What do we need to do to make it so we can point to a specific image, whether that be a simple image or whether that be a more complex net install or a netboot image? Well, first we'll need an IP address. We're going to need an NBI name. And what that is when you use the system image utility to create a netboot image, it'll create a folder that ends in .nbi. That just means it's a net bootable image. So you need to specify what that folder name is, and it does need to end in NBI. And then your DMG name. I just use netboot.dmg because that's the default image that as the system image utility will create. It's just called netboot.dmg. So let's look at the actual command. So we've got sudo bless, and then 2 dashes netboot. That's telling the bless command, hey, we want to netboot. Then we're going to specify the booter file. So we'll do tftp, the IP address, the NBI name, i386 booter. That's the default location for where that booter file is going to be. If we're just doing simple diagnostics like that Apple Service Toolkit, that's all you're really going to need to specify is the IP address, where that booter file is. And you'll be able to specify that through self-service or any other way that you want to have these users run it. If we're going to boot off of an actual image, like if we want to boot into something that can use Casper imaging, then we need to specify those 2 extra pieces. We're going to need to specify the kernel cache as well as the other options. Now, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. So the kernel cache, same thing. You go into that i386 folder, but you also have an x86_64, and there's that kernel cache. And the options thing, I'm not even going to try to read that. I know that's messy. So what I did to help out is on Jamf Nation for this specific presentation, there is a text file that has this information in it, and it's formatted for 2 ways. It's going to be formatted so you can use the bless command for the NetSUS appliance, but the Apple server, if you're using a netboot server, whether you're running server 10.8, 10.9, 10.7, it puts it in a little different file. It's in library tftp boot netboot, and that's where some people get tripped up in using the NetSUS appliance versus the Apple server. So on that text file online, it'll say, hey, if you're using a NetSUS appliance, you want to use it this way, versus if you're using the Apple netboot server, you actually want to use it this way. You still use booter kernel cache options. Where it really matters is right in this beginning area here. Right after this IP address, it's the subfolders that those files are being hosted in. So let's talk about use case examples. At the company I work at, we do have Apple service disk images available in self-service, as well as using Netboot to reload test machines in the test environments. So let's talk about that first scenario. We have a bunch of really, really weird restrictions. Working in an insurance industry, there's a bunch of different compliance and regulatory things that we have to follow. And one of the things that that means is that we have like 700 floors of lawyers, and nobody gets along with anybody. I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with, but it's really, really difficult sometimes to maintain relationships with different companies. So currently, we actually don't have an NDA with Apple. And what that means is that if a computer breaks, we can't send it to them, and we didn't have an inside repair facility. So we had to have all of our different business partners who are located all across the country ship it directly to our headquarters, and then we had a contract with a local repair facility that would just repair it for us. That means that there was a long turnaround time whenever something would break, and since we didn't have those diagnostic tools built yet, it would be a really long time before we even knew what was wrong. So if somebody's hard drive is potentially bad, we wouldn't know that right away. We would wait for it to be shipped. Okay, well, now let's ship it to Illinois, and now let's go ahead and drive it across the street to this repair facility. Okay, well, now that they're checked in with other people, we have to wait 3 or 4 days. It'd be about a week and a half turnaround time before we could potentially get the computer shipped back to them. So the solution is to have these, oops, we went too far. You know, they warned me about the little thing on the side here, and I didn't think I was going to do it, but I did. So let's keep going back. Solution is diagnostics locally run on the machine. So what we did is we made it so we can have ASD available in self-service. And I don't think I said it before, ASD stands for Apple Service Diagnostics. And what that is used for advanced troubleshooting. Who uses Apple Service Diagnostics as opposed to Apple Service Toolkit, or both? Oh, a lot more than I expected, actually. So a lot of you guys will actually know what I'm talking about. Instead of Apple Service Toolkit, which will just run kind of like a 5-minute diagnostic, get a quick snapshot of the system, say, okay, I don't even detect a screen, so it's probably broken. What the Apple Service Disk will do is it'll do a full surface scan of the hard drive. It'll do a full memory scan. It can actually take 2.5 hours, depending on the hard drive side, but you get everything that you need as far as the diagnostic information for that machine. So it's really, really helpful for us to say, okay, a business partner just called in and said, I can't, my computer won't connect to the internet, or something's really weird happening, the screen is somewhat flickering. Instead of having them ship, or they say it's slow, instead of having them ship it all the way to us, we can say, okay, open up self-service, click this button, it'll automatically restart, have it run the diagnostics, and we'll already know what the problem is before they even have to ship it to us and we have to bring it to that other repair facility. So how do I get these Apple Service Disk images? They can be obtained through GSX, or if you have a preferred Apple Care contract, you can get, usually they ship them to you on disks, but if you have that contract and a new one comes out, you can actually still go to a GSX URL and download them regularly. If anybody needs that URL from me, please find me afterwards, or I'll just post it on Jamf Nation, because it's going to be restricted to people who are actually allowed to use it. You won't be able to get to it if you can't log in. Like I said, they're available as disks or DMGs. So let's talk about it in self-service. How do I get that into self-service? Well, first thing you need to do is you need to make that disk netbootable. Now, there's 2 different types of ASD images. You have the ASD OS version and the ASD EFI version. Do I say it? Let's stop right there. So the EFI version is the same thing as like Apple Service Toolkit, where it's a really, really small, maybe 20 meg file, self-contained. You don't need to have a kernel cache. You don't need to have a DMG. It's really, really easy to distribute over a network, especially if you don't even have very high bandwidth. That one's a little tricky to create. We can get into that in a minute. The other type is the OS diagnostic. It'll perform different kinds of tests that you can't perform in an EFI mode, because you can actually have drivers and kexes loaded in an OS environment. So that'll do some advanced graphic troubleshooting. It'll go in, check for wireless, make sure that your wireless connectivity works. Those ones are actually really easy to make. Those Apple Service Diagnostic disks that are the OS ones, they're built on the most recent OS that was available at the time that they made that disk. So a recent disk is going to be running 10.8. So what you need to do to make that netbootable is open up your 10.8 server, go open up the system image utility, and it'll actually recognize that as an installable volume that it can just make netbootable for you. So you just click next and it'll do it. All the hard work is done. You put it in your Netboot folder. It's done. The EFI ones are a little bit more difficult. Apple actually straight up says that you cannot do it. It's not supported. It's impossible. Don't try it. I've been told that like 3 times. But they're wrong. You can, and it works very, very consistently. We've had the great results every single time we do it. However, it's not the easiest thing in the world. So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to post instructions on how to do that on the session page. You should have those up by the end of the week. Really, all you need to do is create that folder manually, drag and drop the files off of that image, that DMG that they'll give you, put it in the right spot, and create your own plist file or whatever you need. Plist file if you're using the Apple Netboot server, or you can just format the bless command correctly if you're using the NetSUS Appliance. But I'll get those up there so you guys can see that. The other trick is that not every service disk image is supported, or not every model supports every Apple service disk image. There's actually a lot of them, and they have really weird numbers. So 3S138, 3S145, and the names don't correlate to what model it matches at all. What you probably want to do is look up either through GSX, or if you actually had the disks shipped to you, they'll say what models they support on the disks, and you need to assign it to each model that supports it. So if you don't do this, you can have a user that opens up self-service and will see 40 different netbootable images, and they have no idea which one they want to use. They'll just click it, it'll reboot, and say it's not supported, sorry. What you're going to want to do is create a smart group where the criteria is, hey, you know what? I've got 3S144, so I know that supports, I think it's the mid-2012 or mid-2011 iMac and a couple different MacBook Pros. I think that they release like 2 or 3 per year, right around when they release new models. That way, you can create the policy and assign it only to the machines that have it supported, so they only see one netbootable image. They click it, the computer restarts, they get a full diagnostic run on their machine, and we just saved ourselves a lot of time. Yes. So like I said before, EFI or OS versions of the diagnostic can be made, and the OS images can be made through the system image utility. And I will post those instructions to Jamf Nation. So what about Apple Service Toolkit? Now, currently, the company I work for, we don't have GSX. We're working on the contract for it, but we don't have it yet. So I don't know. It should work. All it is, like I said, is that simple booter file. However, since you have to actually install Apple Service Toolkit and have those other background reporting pieces, as well as that gateway, it probably will only work on that Apple server. Whether you're running 10.8, 10, 10.7, I think it will do 10.7 server or higher is what you currently need, but I know you need a server version of the OS. If anybody is currently running and would like me to take a stab at it, meet me in the 8th floor after this. I'd be happy to help out. In theory, that booter file should work, but it may not do all the advanced reporting features if that booter file is just being hosted on the NetSUS Appliance. Does anybody have any questions so far on that Apple Service Disk piece? No, okay, we can keep moving forward, and we'll go back to questions at the end. The other scenario that we use is going to be reloading our test machines. So we've got some restrictions as well because of all this other regulatory stuff. Right now, we can only reload test machines. We cannot touch production machines at all because in case there's some kind of lawsuit or something crazy to go on against the company or somebody's been lying about their time, we need to make sure that we're not losing that data of when the computer has been used, the file system, all the analysts that do all this legal stuff, they want the machine to be completely untouched. We cannot remove any data, so it has to stay exactly the way it is. Testing areas do sometimes break their machines, though, and since it's in test, we are allowed to reload those. The reason, we break things and we want to test them so they can fail, we can keep getting better, so we do want to give them the opportunity to break their machines and make it so they can reload it so they'll continue to do some testing for us. The other restriction we have is that we only really have one area that we will load our machines in. There's a long story behind that, but what that means is I don't want somebody in a testing environment to break their machine and potentially be in a different building and have to bring the machine all the way back to us just so we can re-image the machine. So the solution is going to be to use Netboot. And we'll pre-populate that auto-run data. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to create a Netboot image, and this is going to be one of those more complex ones I talked about, which, interestingly enough, is easier to make. You're going to create that with the system image utility again, and you'll just upload that straight to the NetSUS Appliance. And then you need to create a policy in self-service, and we scope it only to test machines. So we give them a different asset tag that says test, And we'll scope it, we'll create a smart group that says if their asset tag says test, they're in this group. And we'll scope that policy to that group of machines. And then we'll enter the auto run data into the JSS. So what happens then is the user will click that button in the JSS, or in self-service. It'll automatically reboot. We've got it so the auto run information is already in there. It'll automatically boot up, it'll automatically log in, open up Casper imaging, and image the machine. Now, in an earlier session, I forget the guy's name, the one from Oxford, so I'm sure you guys know what I'm talking about. He had mentioned that during their imaging, they actually black out the screen. I think that's a cool idea. We're probably going to implement that way so the user can't mess with the machine or the image while it's being netbooted, reloading the machine. That's a really cool idea. So next, those are the use cases that we have for the Netboot server, specifically, or for Netboot specifically at that company. Next, we can talk about the software update server. So how many of you guys went to the other session about the software updates? Okay, I didn't go to that one. We may overlap just a tiny bit. I don't have a ton of information on that, but I'm going to talk about how we specifically use it at this insurance company. So what is it? I can just read directly off this. I mean, it hosts the Apple software updates traditionally that are hosted on OS X servers to allow for administration of these software updates on your clients. Why would you want to do that? Well, it allows you to control what updates are available to the users. Maybe you don't want a specific one for whatever reason, or you know that one of them actually broke it, or maybe you have a new version of iTunes that came out and you have to have those terms and agreements reviewed. You don't want people going out and downloading that. If you have your clients pointing to this software update server, you can make it so they don't get that latest update. You can make it so you can review everything and test everything before it goes out. So let's talk about the specific restrictions that we have at this insurance company. Every new update we have to test for at least 3 days. And this is a process that's on the Windows side that we have to mimic on the Mac platform. After that, we've got a 5-day cooldown period. So we've got 3 days of testing. And then whether something goes perfectly fine or if it completely fails, we still have to have that 5-day cooldown period. What that means is just wait. You just wait. Maybe something will go wrong in 5 days that didn't go wrong in the first 3 days, but like I said, we just wait. And then once that's done, we can go ahead and deploy it to the rest of the production if no issues are found. So how do we want to do that? We'll have multiple branches in the NetSUS appliance. How do you do that? Well, I'm not going to go into how specifically how you create the different branches. I think that was covered in the other one. If not, like I said, I'm going to be in the eighth floor in the classrooms. Definitely happy to fire up my virtual machine of it and show you how to create those branches. But what we specifically do at this insurance company to make sure that we can test first is first we have a script in self-service that writes a dummy receipt. Now, not a lot of people hate those. That's how we do it. And the reason why we do that will become apparent in a minute. What happens is we write that dummy receipt, and if anyone doesn't know what a dummy receipt is, it's just a blank file that we can read with an extension attribute to check if it's actually there. And that's what that is. That extension attribute will pick up, say, hey, I noticed that that dummy receipt was there. I'm going to return a different value than if it wasn't there. Then we create a smart group based off of that dummy receipt. Say, oh, okay, well, now that because that extension attribute returned this value, we're going to have a group of people where we've got this dummy receipt written. And then we can deploy a different catalog URL, that different branch via a managed preference. So the reason we're going to want to do this is because, don't go ahead. Good. The reason we're going to want to do this is because we have a security patch that goes out every month, and we've got a pilot group of users that get to use it like just about a week in advance beforehand for that 3 days of testing and that 5-day cooldown period. We don't want everyone in the entire company to get these updates if they're not working. We want these pilot people to do it first. So like I said, we're going to give those pilot people the option in self-service to install those updates first by clicking that value, or clicking that policy, which will write the dummy receipt, and it'll go through all those things, put them in the correct group, and then when our software update script runs, since we ran a recon, since we got inventory, we moved them into the correct smart group, that software update script, it doesn't care if it's production or not, is going to use the correct catalog URL that's been set with that managed preference. And then at the end of that script, we have it moving back into the production catalog. One additional note, actually getting close to wrapping up here, and then I wanted to save a little bit of time for some Q&A because I want to talk about how you guys are using it, is when we did our testing, we noticed that there was a lot of issues getting the updates onto the NetSUS appliance at the very beginning. We had problems with it actually downloading, and we realized that it's because we had a proxy that required authentication. And even though we would set the authentication information, the proxy information in the NetSUS appliance, it wasn't being respected. And that's because Reposado, which is that kind of background piece that will go and get the updates from the Apple server, it has its own config file. So that's where it is, and I'm going to post these slides on Jamf Nation as well, so if you don't want to write it down now, you can go grab it then. And this text is going to be really, really small, but I'll tell you what it says. And like I said, these slides are going to be on Jamf Nation. What we're doing there is we're specifying a key saying additional curl options. What is our proxy? What's the proxy user? And then the password in there, and then close it out. So in that form, it is being stored in plain text. So I'm not sure if you guys would want to use a kind of a service account or not, something that it can be configured with. Nobody else should have access to this, but just be aware that that right there is stored in plain text. And with that, we went a little bit quicker than I thought, but I'm going to open it up to questions. And I want to hear about how you guys are using the NetSUS appliance, and we can bring Eric back up as well to answer things specifically about the appliance or anything else. So what kind of questions do you guys have? Right there. Somebody, I think someone is going to run around with a microphone too. Is that not happening? All right, go ahead.
You mentioned that you were using a script that basically puts a dummy file in place that says, you know, hey, you're part of the update candidate.
Right.
At this point. Does your software update script, when it actually runs software update, remove that file?
Yes.
That user gets placed back in the general production pool at the end of the update?
So the question was, in our software update script, will it remove that dummy receipt at the very end if the user was part of that test branch? And the answer is yes, because we always want them to be in production, but when they're doing that initial testing phase, we want them to opt in and run the software update script the same, because the script itself never changes whether it's in production or test, but it's going to run just the software update command and just install the ones that are available. And yes, then at the very end it removes it. And we always do a recon at the very end of our software update process. That way, after the specific pieces of software have been installed, we have the most up-to-date inventory. And then when you're doing that inventory report, it will move it correctly back into the other group where they get the production updates. Other questions?
Hi, this question is about hosting multiple Netboot images off the NetSUS.
Yes.
One of the things that I'd love to be able to do with the NetSUS is move my Netboots off to it. I have about 10,
Okay.
which are a mix of diskless Netboot utility disks and like boot sets that I use for Deploy Studio and things like that. When you have multiples, are they advertised in startup disk and when you hold down the option key, or do you just see the faux Netboot?
Right. So the option, the question was asking, this person said that they had a lot of different images, or actually, you know what, you had a microphone, so I'm not even going to repeat your question. Everyone already knows. All right. So the answer is, and Eric, correct me if I'm wrong, it's just going to display that faux Netboot currently. It's not going to advertise all of the other ones that you have available. And that's when that bless command comes in handy, is because you can have that in self-service. You can open up that advanced tab, and instead of even like using a script to do it, you can, in that advanced tab, you can say execute command in that for the editing a policy, and you'll just put the bless command right in there and say go specifically to either just boot.efi, or you can have that whole command out saying, okay, also go to this kernel cache and use this DMG.
Is it possible to add that advertising functionality? Because what's happening in my shop is that occasionally we'll get people who don't have a lot of Mac experience who still need to set up a machine. And one of the things I can do with my Apple-provided Netboot service is I can just tell them, hold down Option,
right, and
look for this name, click on that.
Right.
Whereas if I tell them, you need to run bless, and that requires logging in, and that requires opening terminal,
right,
it will go badly.
Do these machines already have self-service on them?
Yes, but, well, in this case, no, because this is for a machine that you're pulling out of the box and you're netbooting immediately to set up the machine. So there's no configuration on it yet.
Right. Eric would be better, be able to answer the future of the appliance.
So the advertisement function that you're seeing when you hold the option key is actually driven off that DHCP comp file. So if you take a look in there and right now, the way that we have the scripts working, it'll just blow it away and write down the 1 every time. As long as you don't go back into the web interface and re-enable it, you could actually duplicate those out and just change out the DMG that you're pointed at and change out the image ID. The most manual part would be changing the name that's displayed from fall netboot to something unique for each of them. It's possible, and we've built it so that in the future we could potentially add something like that.
Because that's the kind of thing that I'd like to have just work.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that that's one of the most requested features of the NetSUS appliance on Jamf Nation too. Other questions? I know I've got one. Oh, here we go. I'll let you pick.
Okay.
Is there any possibility to choose if you want to have diskless enable or not?
So there is. So if you're using the system image utility from Apple to create a netboot image, it'll actually create a plist file, and you can edit that plist file as a value that just says, I think it's actually called is diskless, and you just say yes or no. It's right in there. If not, I'm not sure how the NetSUS appliance would treat that since it doesn't read the plist. I mean, realistically, it should do everything the same.
Yeah, so the NetSUS appliance should always be booting diskless over AFP and using a shadow file on the server.
Right.
So it shouldn't matter what you upload, that should work.
Right. Yes.
Oh, hey. I did go to the earlier session. It was pretty introductory. So
Great.
the one question I have come across is with a single NetSUS in place, is sort of a rolling testing of the service. I seem to continuously detect updates that I have not intended. I've confirmed the plist file is, the configuration is pointing to the NetSUS, let's say iTunes 11.1.1. I haven't enabled it, but my client is seeing it. Is it possibly a caching server somebody has enabled somewhere?
What's likely going on there, and this could not be it, I would guess that the catalog URL isn't being correctly set on the client.
It's a functioning catalog URL. I can confirm some work, but one, I thought there might be a delay when I've enabled it. If I recon the client, can I force it, to okay, I've definitely forced the sync of this NetSUS catalog just now, even though nightly it does it. Is there any, any way to sort of instantly sync it to say, 11.1.1 is available or not, and instantly with your test environments, are you seeing it pretty quick?
Yeah, so as soon as we click that checkbox, what it's doing is it's rewriting the reposado config file, and I believe it restarts the service immediately, and it's live. As soon as you check that box and you click apply, that's where that little hiccup is it's actually, because it's actually using the command line interface that Reposado has with open source to rewrite that config file and start it immediately. So you're right, sometimes it does take a little bit for them to show up to be able to be checked if it hasn't been synced recently, but you can force the sync with that button on the home page. If you're still not seeing it, I can't think of any other reason why so is the checkbox not showing up or the client's not seeing it?
It's showing up as an item. I haven't checked it yet. The client
The client can still see it? I would almost guarantee that somehow the client's being pointed to a different catalog URL. Okay. Tell you what, right after this session, if you want, I'm going to be on the 8th floor. If you want to continue to talk there, I'm sure we can figure it out.
2 questions. Is there a limit to the number of branches you can add?
I don't believe so.
No, there
Okay.
shouldn't be.
The other thing, I'm finding that new machines purchased in the last 5 months, 6 months, I have to set them up with a dummy user account, log in, go through all the BS to set it up before I can actually reboot and see my Netboot appliance. If I just try to do it out of the box, starting it up, holding N, it won't do it. It continues to go to the Apple setup. It's on its own VLAN with a helper statement only pointing to my Netboot.
So that's interesting because the Netboot should act exactly the same. You can rip the hard drive out of the computer and it's the EFI that'll actually load that netboot image. It's not anything related to the OS whatsoever. So that'd be interesting that it would perform differently based off of what you're doing inside of the OS, considering it doesn't look there. Is that the only way that you're trying to netboot, is just holding down that end button and having the DHCP helpers push it over?
So far, because I'm getting machines brand new out of the box, so I'm trying to get them imaged as quickly as possible.
So I'm wondering, what also could be happening is, depending on how those machines are getting IP addresses, what your DHCP server is, it could be that since those machines were already on the network, they have an IP address and they're able to communicate to that netboot server, versus when they're brand new out of the box, it could be that they're getting a little bit of a delay in getting that address. And so it's not really that you've modified something on the OS, it's just the fact that it's been on the network, and then when you're restarting it is already on the network, it's able to more quickly find that server. Because the netboot discovery does have a timeout, and so it may just be timing out the first time you try it.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I had the same problem. I had 30 MacBook Pros that I had to re-image. They weren't finding it, holding the N key. Hold down the Option key, see if that works for you. That isn't working for you either?
Oh. On your Apple server, do you have your Apple server running DHCP?
Set up by my network.
Let's talk after. I'm not sure about that. Do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, we can take a look and get some TCP dumps and see what might be different.
Yes.
For the person who was saying that they were seeing software updates come down that they hadn't enabled on their SUS, there was an issue a little while ago where a trailing space was added to the end of the catalog URL. If you do a default read, you won't see that trailing space, and then that was causing the clients to default back to Apple's SUS servers. If you do a PL util and then convert it to XML and then grep out the catalog URL, you'll see the trailing space. And so there's many ways you can remove that trailing space, but that might be what you're seeing, and it caused me a bit of grief for a while too. Good luck.
Great idea.
Anybody else?
I have a pretty loud voice, so I'll answer the over.
Sure.
The multiple netboot images, I know the Apple Service Toolkit has like a, are you sure you want to enter in a decline? And then after that, there's also I've detected this many images. Thank you. We have quite a few images as well, and in the Apple Service Toolkit, I haven't gotten successfully to work, but it does see those other images. So if you can get the Apple Service Toolkit, put on your NetSUS, you can boot into the Apple Service Toolkit, leave that as like the default, boot into that, then pick another netboot environment for that to load.
Let's talk about that for a minute, because that's a very good point. So for anyone who hasn't used the Apple Service Toolkit, it almost will provide its own boot menu. Once you've actually booted into it, the default option after you click yes, I agree, is going to say, okay, do you want to run Apple Service Toolkit? But you can hit down, and it'll list with other netboot images. And I know that in there, if you have other netboot images in the same folder that the NBI for the Apple Service Toolkit is in, it will list them. And if it's an actual image that, like a full net install or a netboot image that has a DMG, you can select it and it'll immediately start booting. The issue that I ran into when using that is that if it was just a simple EFI image, since an already simple EFI booter was loaded, it had problems reloading a different EFI netboot image at the same time. So what I would do is I would select that, and if I turn the machine off and then back on again, selecting that blessed the system with the new EFI boot option, and it would netboot directly into that. Now, one catch there is that that would have to be on the same subnet, or you would have to have the same DHCP helpers for that restart to work, because any machine that has the Lion Internet Recovery enabled in the firmware or later, so anything like mid-2011 or later, lost the ability to stumble across subnets just by giving it an IP address that it needs to boot. And when you use the Apple Service Toolkit, it's not going to necessarily do that entire thing. Sometimes it will fail to stumble across that subnet. Now, the reason I didn't mention that before is if you're using that full bless command that's posted on Jamf Nation, you can boot across as many subnets as you want to. As long as it is specifically specified via IP address, it'll still get there. So that's a good point.
One thing that I've been seeing in my environment as well is the NetSUS Appliance is up. It's pulled down all of the updates, and I've created a single branch that I just want to be the root. And as I look at that branch, I'll see combined updates for 10.8.5, and I'll have a client that is pointed to the right catalog because I can remove those items from that catalog, and those items will be removed from the client. But I've noticed that on a 10.8.4 client, that when I run software updates, I'm not seeing any combined updates for 10.8.5. Do you have any ideas on that?
We got, everything in my company is 10.8 or later. We really hammer users to upgrade, so I don't have any points on that with 10.4. Oh, 10.8.4. Okay. Sometimes I've seen that there's duplicates that will look like duplicates that will say it's the same version. One is the combined update, and one is just like the small delta. I would make sure you're enabling both of them, but I haven't seen anything that would cause it to not be seen at all by a specific client, but not the other.
Just going back to Rich's question from the beginning about multiple NetBoot offerings on the option boot screen. It's possible to do it. You can add more images in the DHCP config, but in order for the DHCP server to be able to understand when the client is requesting a particular image, you have to implement a vendor-specific option space in that file. It's a little bit complicated to do, but you can do it, and then you can offer multiple NetBoot images that will show up at the option boot screen, and you can click on one and it'll work. One limitation between doing that and OS X server is that you will not see NetBoot images offered in the startup disk preference pane. The reason being that the system preferences application actually sends out the DHCP request on an ephemeral high port, not 67 or 68, which are normally used. So the DHCP server that's used on the NetSUS appliance, or if you just roll your own, is not going to know to return the packet to that high port. So if you option boot, you'll see all your offered images if you set it up this way, but if you just open up the system preferences pane, you won't see anything. And that, as far as I know, there isn't a solution to that yet, although somebody could create one by modifying maybe ISC DHCP server for Linux. The other thing is the issue with when you want to have diskless NetBoot and dealing with what you do with your shadow files. It is possible to modify the rc.netboot. I see some nods over there. So that you can use a RAM disk instead. And that way that kind of solves the issue of having to have writable network storage. So.
Thank you.
And these are the gentlemen from Oxford, so as an authoritative source.
And there's a really good documentation on Google Code how to do this. You Google for, what was it? How to set up your NetBoot server using Linux or something like that. I tweeted it just right now.
Anybody else? Over here?
We got one down in front here.
Okay.
At some point in the future, is there any plans to take, right now with the NetSUS Appliance, there's really no accounts, sites per se, for setting up the test branches and your production branches and things like that? I guess what I'm thinking is there a way that at some point it would incorporate like into sites where different people could control different branches, but not, I guess I'm thinking in a multi-department area where we've got different people that administer systems, that each administrator could control their own branch without modifying anybody else's.
Not today, and I don't know, we don't have any plans for that. I'd be curious if you want to post it out on Jamf Nation as a feature request. We can see what other people have as feedback on that.
There's one all the way over here.
Over here.
If people like on alternating science could just raise their hands once at a time so we can watch them run.
So a question with the software update server. Right now we're using Apple's software update server, and we're using Apple's documentation to cascade those software update servers off of each other. So one master server feeding multiple subservient servers, but limiting traffic to Apple. We've played with it a little with 2.0 SUS OVA, but there's some malformation in the URLs when you try to cascade them off of each other, and I'm just wondering if that is supported configuration. I know I see discussion on Jamf Nation from 2012, but nothing since then, where it said you had to write your own URL rewrite codes, but I just didn't know if that was a supported configuration.
Where's the URL getting malformed?
When you look at the actual update catalogs, you see some Python malformation. It looks like in the from pointing it from one NetSUS to another NetSUS, when the URLs that it's pulling down are not fully formed for the actual update package.
I don't use that. So.
Yeah, I'd be curious if you got time after this, we'll be up on the 8th floor in one of the classrooms, if we could take a look. It'd
All
be,
right.
Because you might not be the
interested
only one
in
seeing
making
that
that work.
either. Other questions? All right, well, oops. Thank you for coming. And if, like I said, if anybody has any other questions, 8th floor, please.